full window into this global issue that can be really overwhelming. The Colorado River Basin is one of the most economically productive regions in the world. This is a water basin that supplies water to 40 million people from Wyoming to Mexico. It's a basin that supplies irrigation water to 5.5 million acres of farmland, whose hydropower resources can produce more than 4,000 megawatts of power. And it is a basin that is also an icon of water management. When we think of water infrastructure, we imagine the Hoover Dam. We imagine Lake Powell and Lake Mead, these resources that allowed desert cities to flourish, desert cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix. We imagine the Colorado Aqueduct, which brought water and continues to bring water today across to Southern California and the millions of people there. And it is a set of assets and a water system that worked fine for the 20th century. It worked pretty well. But something really changed right around the turn of the century, almost like clockwork. This is a river basin that is now, has been under a drought for more than a decade. And that drought has exposed the vulnerabilities of even the most highly engineered of water systems. We have come uncomfortably close to seeing the Hoover Dam have to shut down its power generation as the water flows ran too low. We have seen Las Vegas have to invest almost $1 billion just to put a third pipe into an existing water supply as their lake levels dropped. And these are just a couple of indicators that perhaps as we think about what water security really means and what it means for businesses, that we might have to look beyond just infrastructure and technology. That perhaps what we need to think about is how we invest in the development of human institutions that are better able to manage water in this era of change. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is the role of the private sector in the development of those social innovations that are needed. I'm going to ask Peter to start us off. You've been working with the Pacific Institute, with global corporations and governments for years on what climate change means for water resources and water security. And I'd like you to help us understand what is happening on the Colorado River Basin and what it means for global businesses.
Well, good morning, everyone. We've heard a lot of talk in the last day or so about energy and a lot of talk about climate. We've heard a little talk about water, but we're going to hear more right now. So shift gears to water. Water is really similar to energy, but it's also different. And in the context of the Colorado, what I'd really like to do is talk about it in the sense of the Colorado as an indicator for what's going on in a lot of different places, not just in the Western US. And think about it in the context of what I'd like to call peak water. The truth is there are limits to water resources. Water is a renewable resource, mostly, not entirely. It has some characteristics of non-renewability with groundwater overdraft. But the Colorado River is a renewable resource. It's renewable in the sense that what we use today has no effect on how much we get next year. There's a hydrologic cycle, and the Colorado River flows. But we're running up against limits. And on the Colorado, and on the Yellow River, and on the Yangtze, and on the Nile, and on almost any major river where humans play a role, there are limits. We might want more water out of the Colorado River, but we can't have any more, because effectively, we take it all. That's what I mean by peak water in this sense. And it's different than energy. Energy, part of the big debate is substitutability. Okay, we've decided that fossil fuels have a liability to them. There are plenty of fossil fuels. One might argue we're never going to run out of fossil fuels. We're running out of the environmental ability to burn them. So we want to substitute. But for water, there are effectively no substitutes. It's not a question of substituting something with some exceptions. It's a question of limits. And on the Colorado, the issues are quantity, how much is available, and what are we choosing to do with it. We have quality issues in terms of the quality of the water that's available and the quality we need. There are political issues. The Colorado River is shared by 7 states and Mexico. And we have an international treaty with Mexico. So any decisions about allocations and use of water on the Colorado are political issues as well. repercussions of running up against these limits are, as one might imagine, many. And again, think about this not just in the context of Western water, but on the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee Flint between Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, or diminishing lake levels in the Great Lakes, or constraints on economic productivity in northern China because they're overpumping groundwater and the flows of rivers are diminishing, and they're finding constraints on economic production. So there are physical repercussions, not enough water to do what we want. There are social repercussions, conflicts, political conflicts, in parts of the world, violent conflicts over water. There are legal ramifications. We have disputes. Just a week or two ago, the Supreme Court heard about a dispute between Texas and Oklahoma on the Red River. And there's a dispute between Georgia and Tennessee on the Tennessee River. And I could go on, legal disputes that we have to deal with. There are market disputes. Are we going to be able to produce the things that we produce with Colorado River water? A lot of which is agriculture, but not all of which is agriculture. As water becomes scarcer, more valuable, as we begin to reallocate from one user to another, there are market questions. Intel had to put in place one of the most efficient chip producing plants in the Southwest because there were constraints on water availability. We're talking about insisting that solar plants, centralized solar plants in California, have dry cooling because there's not enough water for wet cooling systems. There are reputational risks. You've all had these discussions in the context of environmental issues, in the context of energy, in the context of climate, reputational risks, market risks, legal risks, regulatory risks. And I'd just like to say, in the context of the Colorado and almost any other river basin of the world, we're having the same discussions about water, but not enough of those discussions. And let me leave it back.
Okay, I might ask you to add just a little bit more, because we know you just kind of started to touch on it, the effect of climate change on this river basin. Can you help us understand how that is going to sharpen some of the dynamics you just described?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry I left it out. Those of you who know me know I rarely leave out climate change. I'm a climatologist and a hydrologist by training. The hydrologic cycle that makes the Colorado River a renewable resource that you all remember from 5th grade, evaporation, formation of clouds, condensation, precipitation, runoff, evaporation again. The hydrologic cycle is the climate cycle. We are already well into climate change, and we are already seeing evidence in the hydrologic cycle of the impacts of climate change. Increases in evaporative demand for water. Agriculture is going to need more water in many places just to grow the same crops we already grow if we choose to do that because of higher temperatures. Changes in precipitation patterns, changes in storm frequency and drought frequency. And we're in the midst of an incredibly severe drought in the Great Plains of the United States, Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, multi-year drought, and yet we're seeing unprecedented flooding in parts of the world as well, so extreme events. On top of all of the challenges without climate change, we now have climate change. And among the risks for a basin like the Colorado River, the models are telling us not only have we over-allocated the water that we think we get in the Colorado, but climate change may reduce the amount of water we're going to get on average in the Colorado. And so deal with all of the risks that I've already mentioned and layer on top of it climate-related risks, and you have a problem of, I would argue, unprecedented magnitude.
I think that's important context, because what we're dealing with is a dynamic system here, one that's already over-abstracted, one where there's already so many drains on it that the resource itself cannot keep up. And yet, I want Lester, you were the Secretary of Resources for the state of California. You have a long history of understanding water policy in this part of the world, one that depends very heavily on this river system. That dynamic system is not necessarily being matched and managed by a set of institutions that are themselves dynamic and robust and able to change and adapt over time. So give us a sense of this institutional and human overlay on this system. Where are we now?
First, let me start. I didn't fully understand the hydrologic cycle until just a moment ago, so I'm hoping Peter can sketch that out for me in a minute. Now, I want to start by really concurring concurring with Peter, especially the last point. On the Colorado River, I think the day after they did the basic allocations based on 15 million acre feet of average flow, they knew that was high, but that's how they did the deal. And so it was based on fiction to begin with, and now it's not remotely capable of producing that level. So you have a political fiction now exacerbated by a hydrologic reality. And in terms of the institution's abilities to respond to this, first I'd say, I think it was NRDC did a report last year on different states' preparedness to adapt to climate change readiness. And I was actually surprised to see California, I think, got an A, along with a few other states. And while that was great that there was some recognition of a few of the programs, I thought, oh my God, what's going on in the states that have Ds? Because we are not ready in California to respond to these conditions. And I think there's some things that have been put in place, like the concept of integrated regional water management, where you're looking at multiple benefits and a broader strategy of putting more tools in the toolbox, a portfolio approach, a history of bond funds to help support this kind of integration, and even climate change guidelines on how do you plan for sea level rise. So a lot of those things going on. But the fact is, our natural resource reality is changing faster than our institutions are capable of adapting. And we have constructed these very effective silos. I'm an irrigation district, and that's all I do. I supply water to my farmers. I'm a supply agency or sanitation agency. And so trying to work across those silos slows any possible change, and climate is changing faster. The other I guess I would say, complicating matter is we can sort of look at the Colorado River Basin, but almost all of the major users have straws either indirect or direct into other basins. And so something happens on the Colorado River Basin to short Southern California, and maybe they increase their demand on the Bay Delta system from Northern California. Or they want to transfer water from farms, or they take some other action. So water may not be directly fungible, but problems are. And we've got a problem in one area, we transfer the problem to another area. So I think that there are signs of recognizing this, but I unfortunately believe that our institutions are not capable of responding quickly enough. And it's why I'm a big advocate of the business community getting engaged in this issue and transferring, I'll call it the knowledge of dealing with supply chain risk and uncertainty into the natural resource world. And we have to manage water in the context of broader natural resource issues. So there's some hope that there can be change afoot. Unfortunately, it's not moving fast enough, and with the condition of Congress right now, I'm pessimistic about federal guidance on these issues.
Well, I think what's helpful is to hear from Michael Blade with Molson Coors. You're a global beer manufacturer, and you are dealing with issues within your own facilities and very deeply into your supply chain globally. And it's helpful to hear from you your perspective as a user of water directly, a buyer of commodities that rely on water availability globally. What does this picture of dynamic change, institutional inertia actually mean for your business? Where does it actually meet you and your business risk, and how do you respond to it effectively?
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, water risk is very real to us, but it's also real for our communities as well as our supply chain. I was going to say fortunately or unfortunately, as we've heard, our heritage for its brewing company is within Colorado, where water battles have been fought since the 1800s. But from that, I manage our global water strategy, and we've really taken to three foundational things that we think every company should be doing, and that is transparent reporting, education and outreach, and community engagement. And specifically, what we do around those three things, which I've tried to simplify as I talk to and engage both our employees and our communities around the globe, is we try and engage our communities through watershed forums, for instance, engage our supply chain through best practice sharing. And also, I don't want to forget, we engage our employees, because we're really trying to activate the activists within our company. It's important because our employees will be the innovators, but they'll also be the face of the company when they have to operate remotely, whether they have to operate within the fields of Idaho or whether they're operating in India. With that said, we also want to recognize and celebrate some of our successes. So we've been fortunate within the last few years, despite significant efforts over the last decade and more, that we were recognized by Dow Jones as a North American index listing in 2011, and last year we were listed in the World Index and listed as a beverage sector leader. So that's important not just to tell our executives, but also to celebrate with not just our employees, but also our partners. Now, I know the challenge for some of you, especially in corporations and those of you in the investment community, is you want to hear, do you just buy your way into that? Do you just spend money to get there? Well, of course, you have to spend some money to reduce risk, but I'm happy to say that our efforts around CR, corporate responsibility, and water, waste, and energy have resulted in $10 million in savings to our bottom line from 2008 to 2012, and we're expecting another $16 million in savings to the bottom line through 2020. So I think those are results and discussions that we like to have with others, that beyond just reducing risks, there's a financial piece that's been very positive to us and supports our communities, our supply chain, and our own operations.
I would like you to delve a little more deeply into the sort of work you're doing with your suppliers, because for you, they're your suppliers. For someone in Lester's shoes, certainly somebody who's the Secretary of State Resources or who is part of the negotiation process around how water is used, where you have very entrenched kind of territorial players, some old water rights that are held by mainly the agricultural community. It's a different set of relationships and a different set of dynamics that leads to this inertia and this intractability of problems. And I'd like for us to learn a little bit about how you approaching this through a supplier relationship. These are long-term relationships that you have with the family farms that you buy from. How this begins to potentially move and change this dynamic of intractability that people like Lester have been grappling with for years. So let's talk a little bit about that. Can you talk about this relationship with your suppliers? And then I want Lester to maybe respond and reflect about how that changes things.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing is something that we've had internal discussions around is we talk about policy a lot, water policy, and getting engaged and involved with water policy. But when appropriate, and if you quote me, please make sure you say that I mentioned when appropriate, I believe in practice before policy. And what I mean by that, I'm going to use the supply chain side, and I'm going to specifically use ag supply chain side as a good example. 90% of our water footprint in our industry, my industry, is from ag supply chain. So examples of how we look at practice before policy, such that we may be able to influence policy in a positive way, would be the partnership with the Nature Conservancy and Miller Coors in Idaho, and a demonstration barley farm that was done a few years back, 1,400 acres, where they looked at water savings ideas. They were able to realize 9% water savings, over 100 million gallons, a 20% energy savings, and had about a 3-year return on investment. So again, when it comes to water investments and investing in reducing your water use, you don't typically get to hear those kind of returns, which was exceptional. We also, as we've all heard, that Texas is undergoing severe droughts. Within the Trinity River Basin, they're partnering with Water as a Crop. It's a new way Miller Coors is looking at water. And it's really changed the way farmers are looking at water use, because they're treating it like a crop and they're sharing best practices in land and water conservation. Also, let's not just focus on the US and the UK. We're involved with linking environment and farming. And what we've done there is we used to have 2-day, as a corporation, we're really good at training. Everyone loves that, week-long trainings and what have you. But so we were able to narrow it down to 2 days of training within our ag supply chain. And they learned a lot, but ultimately they asked if we could even narrow that down further. So we have a webinar, and we also have something, these are available online, called Simply Sustainable Water. It's a guidance document on best practices. There's a YouTube video. If you look up linking environment and farming, you'll find that. So those are ways that we're engaging the supply chain, because I believe that if we can demonstrate positive practice, that hopefully that can lead to some policy potentially, and lead to also the sharing of information. So those are just three quick examples of how we've engaged our supply chain.